Welcome to this Hull Noir discussion about Ted Lewis's novel Plender, which would have been our 2020 festival read if the festival had gone ahead as planned this June. Obviously, we've postponed to next March for the festival, but we will be carrying forward Ted's book Plender as our festival read. And we're going to share a bit about that book with you now. My name's Nick Quantrill. I'm one third of the Hull Noir organising team and delivery team. And next to me on the screen, which is a bit of a weird way of looking at it, is Nick Triplow, another third of the team. How are we doing, Nick?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Excellent. So yeah, let's get into it then. Plender, Ted Lewis. It was Ted's 1971 novel. So we're talking 50 years ago, aren't we? And it's kind of come back into print recently, which I suspect we'll get into as we go on. But just tell us a bit about the book and where Ted was in his life at that stage.
Yeah, I mean, it was just off the back of that year. Get Carter had gone into cinemas in March that year. His first crime novel, Jack's Return Home, which had been adapted as Get Carter, had been published the year before. So in a sense, he was like living what he's always wanted, which was to be part of the film industry, and having his book adapted and a feature film with Michael Caine starring was pretty much all he could have hoped for at that point. So he was, in a pretty good place professionally. Work-wise, he'd finished. I think by that point he wasn't doing any animation work. And up to that point, up to Get Carter, he had been working in London as an animator. His second daughter had been born in April, so he was a family man with his wife and kids, and they just moved around that point. They were just on the verge of moving to a farmhouse that he'd fallen in love with in Suffolk, and so that's where he was in a pretty good place. And off the strength of Jack's Return Home, his agent Toby Eady had secured him a deal with Michael Joseph to write a book a year, and Plender was the first in that deal that would see him on into the rest of the 1970s, really.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very different book to Jack's Return Home, isn't it? I mean, Jack's Return Home was quite a kind of classically structured revenge tale, which appeals to a big audience, but Plender isn't in the same way, is it really? It's a lot darker, a lot more noir, I think, in its tone, really. A bit of a departure from a man who's just tasted commercial success in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, yeah, it is. I mean, I think that I've come back to it again because of the festival and because of the new edition, and to look at it again recently. And I think there are certain similarities. There are certain themes about characters who are corrupt and how they've become corrupted. And I think that part of it is common with Carter. But like you say, yeah, you look at Get Carter and you can see those sort of classic revenge narratives, or something that's almost like an old Western flick where you've got a kind of the stranger rides into town. In this case, you've got something that's far more provincial, more suburban, and a little bit more about Lewis's own life experience, if you like, and he kind of takes that as far as he can in terms of just a kind of a grubby little blackmail thriller.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fair summary into it. It's interesting that he's gone from that kind of big landscape, almost of London, them London gangsters, to writing something back in what's essentially some city of Hull, really. Why do you think he wanted to write about Hull at that stage?
I mean, I think what was uppermost in his mind was not repeating himself. And the conversation I had many years ago with Toby Eady, he mentioned that he'd been, having some publisher's lunch with a guy called Sonny Mehta, who founded Knopf Publishing in New York and was a kind of incredible influence on publishing. And his first question to Toby was, why did you let them kill Carter? And in today's publishing world, almost certainly the pressure would have been on Lewis at the end of Get Carter. No, you cannot kill him off. This is there's too much here that we can, this is a serious character and you really need to make that happen. Although he did end up writing prequels. But I think what Lewis was concerned about was, I want to write something that's real. I want to write something that's close to home, and I don't want to repeat myself. And I think coming back to Hull, and this part of the world was very much where he wrote his best stuff. I think when he's writing about Lincolnshire or the Humber or Hull, he's on safe territory, and he has such a good feel for the landscape. And I think that comes through in every fibre of the novel, definitely.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about the novel then itself, because you've hinted that it's a kind of like a grubby blackmail tale. Let's go a little bit deeper, because obviously it's called Plender, and it's the name of the lead character, or one of the lead characters is Brian Plender. And he's a horrible, horrible man, isn't he, really? But it's kind of maybe unusual. I don't know if it's unusual, maybe back in kind of 1970 when Ted was writing that novel, to have dual protagonists in the first person. Because it's kind of a very, there's no sympathetic characters in the novel, is there, for a start? I think that's the main thing.
No, I mean, it's a classic set of Ted Lewis, unredeemable, cynical, nasty, looking after themselves, and those kind of characters that he wrote really well. I think what was unusual at that time, I mean, the way he kind of fractures the narrative between the two characters, and to the point where sometimes you've got half a paragraph for a chapter in the novel because you simply want that character's reaction to what's happened. And so he kind of drills down into their lives. When you look at their relationship, and it's set in the present point in the book, but it delves back into their relationship as they knew each other as kids at school. And the more I've looked into that and come back to that recently, it's almost like there's a present tense where he's kind of not is hooked by Plender. He's in his grip, and this is
Peter Nottington we're talking about.
Yeah, Peter Knott, the character, and he's based on Lewis. When Peter Knott at the beginning of the book explains his background, that he went to grammar school and then he went to art school and then he went to London. He's basically Lewis gives him his own backstory, but the grip that he's caught in, and the way that Plender seems to delight in the kind of sadistic grip, sort of taking advantage of that, and then we find out a little bit more about why he's like that, why their relationship has gone like that. But they're interdependent. There's a point in the book when I went back and read it again, I just thought it's almost like there's a kind of repressed love story between these two, which is quite because they can't express it, it comes out in some quite bizarre and sadistic and nasty ways.
Yeah, it's almost like the two sides of the same coin, aren't they, effectively? And kind of that coin is Ted Lewis himself.
Yeah, and that's something, Ted did that a lot. He did that. I mean, even in Get Carter, when you read the novel, the two sides of the coin are Jack Carter and his brother Frank Carter. Now, Frank kind of disappears from the film apart from being put in a box and buried, cremated or whatever. But in the novel, he's far more of an influential character. And with this, again, there's this duality. And when Ted's writing really well, that idea of there being like two sides of the same person, or two people who are that close together, that there's a kind of an overlap between them. That's quite a prevalent sort of theme in his work. It's there in the last novel, GBH, where you get this switch between a character before and a character now.
Yeah. Does that maybe give Plender a bit more power than Jack's Return Home? That fact there is them two characters facing off constantly, kind of almost battling for some sort of supremacy between them, gives it that kind of more of a psychological edge, maybe. Maybe Ted was ahead of his time possibly there, because a lot of novels you pick up now has that, don't they? That's a very common theme these days.
I mean, it's a psychological novel, definitely. The way that he kind of uses the manipulation between them and what they know of each other, and as I say, it's kind of about a personal corruption, and it's about it's almost about one person saying, well, at least I'm honest about what I am, and really trying to make the other person come clean about what, the way that they're corrupted, the way that they're kind of a kind of deviant character. And in that sense, it does, when you kind of read it again and you reread it, that's what comes out of it, is that strength of the two of them and that conflict between them.
Yeah, because you should almost have some sympathy for Not, maybe, to a degree, shouldn't you? Because he's the victim of circumstances to a degree, but then he finds himself kind of in this web of Brian Nott's blackmail and manipulation. Plender, sorry, not manipulation and blackmail. But by the end of the novel, you almost think he's possibly the worst of the two characters.
Yeah, because he's not. It's not only horrible, he's dishonest about it as well, and he's sort of trying to keep up this pretense of a middle class family man who's made it and trying to keep it all going. And Plender's
Lewis again, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And I don't want to sort of take too much more, because it would be too much of a spoiler. But the way that unfolds, and the way that, as you say, it casts the character the one that you should have sympathy for. He twists that in a really, really quite a clever way, I think.
Yeah, and I guess if there's a third character in the book, it's maybe the location itself, the use of Hull and the landscape around the city and around the Humber. Say a bit more about that for us. I think that was probably important as part of the setting of the book.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the early part where you get a lot of flashbacks about their life together are the places that Lewis grew up. They're in and around Humber, the Humber and Barton and the Humber Bank and the foreshore, which is where, he did a lot of his growing up down there. They used to hang out down there, smoked his first fag down there, and took beers down there when he was underage. That kind of thing. And then Hull and some very, very thinly disguised villages in and around Hull, which are fairly obvious to anybody who knows the area. So he switches between the North Bank and the South Bank, and you do get this sense of the river in between them.
Yeah.
And the idea of that being some kind of barrier, not just a kind of physical barrier, but one between the past and the present. So he uses that landscape in a quite a clever way to it echoes his own journey from Barton to Hull and then to London, but it's also about these two characters and what stays between them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing the novel does really powerfully is, with hindsight, it captures the social change, isn't it, of what England's kind of undergoing in the early 70s as a hangover from the late 60s in there. Do you think that kind of, the uprising of the middle class, that kind of is hinted at in the book, was something that Ted was exploring through his own life and struggling to come to terms with, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's there in Jack's Return Home and Get Carter. That whole idea of the generation that grew up after the war, that their parents would have fought a war and said, this is how you turned out, and this is what you did, and that the notion of a grammar school generation that were the first to benefit from that education and that opportunity to go to college or to university. And I think where you see it in Get Carter, Jack has this idea about the people who were the grammar school fat kids that he knew at school and how they grew up. And then he repeats that. That's a kind of motif that reappears here. The resentment that Plender's got for those people who grew up and had all that opportunity and ended up becoming materialist and superficial. And it is almost that sort of lightly led scenario of a kind of, you got it, you've bought into this and I haven't. And because he's an artist, because Ted's an artist, and he's got that eye for detail and for design, A lot of this stuff is about the way places look, the kind of furnishings people have, the way that their homes look, the kind of double glazing they've got. And so you get a sense of him. Plender's resentful, but
Yeah,
he's
that really comes across, doesn't it, in the
yeah,
novel?
deeply resentful of that. But it's not just because he's got it and I want it. It's because why on earth would you want that? Why on earth would that be something that you'd aspire to? And you know, this is 1971, and this is quite early in the decade to be saying the kind of things that we get used to seeing in you know, the mid-70s and onwards.
Yeah. So yeah, quite a difficult novel in a lot of ways, I think, but still very readable. But coming off the back of Get Carter and the success of that, how did Plender, how was that received by readers and the critics when it came out off the back of a successful film and a reputation?
I don't think it sold as well as you might have liked it to. And I, you know, I don't know. It's difficult to sort of to work out exactly what their expectations were. I mean, Toby Eady was a relatively new agent at that point. As I said, you know, if he'd been a little bit more on top of things, perhaps, you know, Ted wouldn't have had Carter killed off. Perhaps there would have been a way of coming back with something a little bit more commercial. But at the same time, Ted just wanted to write the books that he wanted to write. You know, you admire him for doing things that were on his own terms. So I don't think it sold as well, but I don't think that was necessarily an issue. He had a deal. He had a deal to write a book a year. So in a sense, he had the artistic freedom to be able to say, well, this is what I want to say right now.
How about critically? Because I think the reception to it was pretty reasonable from the...
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, the broadsheets reviewed it. There were some quite favourable reviews. I mean, I know that he sent a copy to Mike Hodges with the possibility of doing something else, another adaptation of the film, but that Hodges wasn't interested. I don't think he wanted to do anything that was quite as dark and quite as noir as that again after Get Carter. Besides, he was already off in Malta shooting Hulk with Michael Caine, so getting a bit of sunshine. Right?
Do you think Ted would have wanted that to be adapted for the screen at the time, or was he more interested in being a novelist?
I mean, I don't think there was ever a point in his life where his aim wasn't to be involved in cinema or in film in some way. And if you look at what of the story of Plender after the novel, he did adapt it himself. He adapted it himself for a BBC TV series when he was writing Z-Cars in the mid-70s. He got to know a few people there. There's a guy called Graham Williams who was a producer, and they devised this idea called the Zodiac Factor, which was about this the series of short films, an hour and 10 minutes, that would be about characters with strange jobs, and one of those was Plender. So Ted did write it as a script, but the whole series, the concept of it got so far, but it didn't get made in the end.
Yeah, but the book did have this kind of a weird second life in terms of the screen, didn't it, when it was picked up by French filmmakers?
It did, yeah. And I think it's a good film. The third act kind of deviates because Plender is, you know, it's essentially a novel. There is no redemption, there is no happy ending. But I think as a film, the script demanded some sort of resolution that wasn't there in the novel, so they changed that. But Eric Barbier came to the novel in the same way most people do, which is he saw Get Carter, he read the novel, and then he went and saw Ted's other novels and really, really liked Plender. He spoke about it as being, to him, it was like Cape Fear, the original Cape Fear film, or Strangers on a Train. And I can see what he means. It's got that Patricia Highsmith thing where you've got these sort of characters who don't do the conventional thing, who don't do what you expect them to do. and he was interested in that. And so yeah, that was made in 2006.
Yeah, so that was filmed as Le Serpent.
It is, yes.
And I think people can get that, can't they? Probably off Amazon and such like, if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I picked it up. One of the few things related to Ted Lewis that didn't cost huge amounts of money. I think it was about £2 or £3 on Amazon. So yeah, you can get that. Thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, and the actual novel itself fell out of print pretty quickly as Ted's life kind of came to an end.
It did. Alison and Busby did an edition in the mid-90s, but it's been out of print up until this year for about 25 years. And No Exit republished Plender and Ted's last novel, GBH, which is a noir classic, really.
Yeah, so where do you think Plender sort of sits in that kind of lineage of Ted's work, effectively? Is it in the kind of the very top tier alongside GBH for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not Champions League.
Oh, no.
It's probably just below that. I think Plender and Get Carter probably, for me, sit at the top as the kind of bookends of Ted's crime fiction career, and Plender is just a shade under that in terms of just because of its kind of readability and its punch, really, its impact.
Yeah.
That's personal. That's my taste, but.
Yeah, so kind of in some ways, Plender was maybe kind of like the beginning of the end almost before his career properly started as a writer, because after that point, there was a tailing off a little bit in terms of quality, where it became a little bit more variable as the 70s progressed before GBH as his masterpiece at the end of the decade.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that he had problems in his personal life, and that he had drink problems as well as the 70s went on. But also not to denigrate the fact that he actually did a lot of television writing in the mid-70s as well. So I think his focus shifted. When he was writing for Z-Cars, he was commissioned and was producing stuff, and he was still writing fiction. But I think the TV writing took a bit more priority. But it's true. I think you get this, then you get Billy Rags, which is based on John McVicker's life story, follows it. And then there's the Carter prequel, Jack Carter's Law, which again is quite a good novel, but it's just not up there with his best work. And then he goes back to writing about Barton, writing about growing up, with a novel called The Rabbit in 1975, which it's not a crime novel in any sense. So you're heading towards GBH in 1980, which it's just one of the best British noir novels ever written.
And also back in print as well now via No Exit Press.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of Plender, back to Plender, we spoke a bit about how it was received at the time by the critics. And now the book's come back out again freshly in sort of 2019, 2020. How was it being received in a contemporary sense, do you think? Because obviously it's a 50-year-old novel, isn't it?
Do you know what? The reviews have been amazing. Absolutely brilliant. And I think people get it. If they didn't before, and I think that's one of the things in his own lifetime, Ted felt that he didn't really get the recognition that he perhaps deserved for what he'd done. And he certainly felt that he'd broken ground with Get Carter and with novels like Plender, that other people then worked from that into various kind of forms. It's there in the Sweeney, it's there in a lot of, British TV stuff in the 70s. But I think that second act, that his career was denied because he died so young, it's happened now, and I think it's a brilliant thing.
Yeah. So in terms of legacy, whereabouts do you see his kind of fingerprints in contemporary crime writing?
I mean, he's there in David Peace's writing. I mean, and David Peace has acknowledged that on numerous occasions, the influence that Lewis had, partly as a writer working in the North and writing about the North in a way that combines the kind of punch of American fiction with something a bit more real and a bit closer to home. That's certainly there. Jay Garner as well with the Long Firm and some of those early, particularly some of those earlier novels. There's definitely a taste of Lewis running through that. Now, you know, and he was recognised that Derek Raymond sort of famously said that he kind of led the way through the Black Jungle, I think, for other writers to follow in that kind of noir vein. And so that influence was there, and I think was there quite early, quite soon after his death, really.
Yeah, and I think GBH is an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's very much a psychological crime novel, of which we see an awful lot of those type of novels these days. You know, he was maybe, you know, you could put him alongside people like Patricia Highsmith almost, couldn't you? In the way he was kind of playing with manipulation and truth and lies and so on, and yeah, you know, well ahead of the game, I think, really.
And I think it's partly in the stories that he's telling, but it's also in the fact that he's living them as well. And because he's a writer who writes from his own experience and does that in quite a brave way, a lot of the time he's exploring his own psychology and his own breakdowns and his own weaknesses as a human being and as a writer, and putting those on the page. Sometimes there's a character there, but sometimes the character almost disappears, and you know that this is somebody who's telling you how their psychology is being affected by, you know, the world that they live in, and to be that truthful and that kind of brutally honest in a crime novel, particularly then, I think it sets him apart.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting quote from Raymond Chandler, which I think you pulled out in the introduction to Plender, saying the test of a writer is whether you want to read him again years after he should by the rules be dated. Do you think kind of Ted Lewis firmly passes that test effectively? Is still relevant today?
He is, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's 50 years. This year's 50 years since Jack's Return Home was published. Next year's 50 years since the first Get Carter film, the only one that really matters, and Plender. And I can't think of many other writers, many other crime writers of that generation whose work is still relevant and is still being read. Not British ones anyway, today. There are very, very few. And I think when people come to him now, they come to him and actually they find that he's quite a contemporary writer. His themes are contemporary. They apply now. That idea of corruption, that idea of habitually the way that people use lies, and the fact that in the end that will always find you out. It's there, yeah, well worth rereading.
Excellent, and I think that's probably where we should leave things for now, and just urge people to pick up a copy of Plender as soon as they possibly can, really.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you very much for tuning in, for listening to us. Our crime festival Hull Noir will be happening, all being well, March 2021. So keep an eye on our website and our social media channels, and we'll be out and about talking about Ted at the festival and the lead-up events. Thank you.
Yeah, go easy. Cheers.